And it's a reminder to us that we all inhabit this earth that Nikki Bowman was creating the blessing for. In the United States, this is Black History Month. And to acknowledge that, I want to share an image from a distinguished African-American artist on the black marble. This is a piece of art created by Jack Whitten, who created a set of what were called black monoliths to honor distinguished African Americans. And this one is in honor of Leroy Jones. I happened to have the opportunity, the last trip I took to New York before the pandemic was to take in an exhibit of Jack Whitten's work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And just an incredibly impressive multimedia artist. He created a series in 1988 called The Black Monoliths, paintings devoted to exemplars of Black excellence in art, music, literature, sports, and politics. Whitten described these works in terms of zographos, from the Greek words for zo, life, and graphos, to write. He said, there are so many Black monoliths in the history of African Americans. He once said, our history of survival in America is defined both by the heroic deeds of the collective and of the independent activists working in a variety of disciplines. The paintings in the series, titled after a rocky outcropping near his home on Crete, are inspired by the mosaics Whitten studied in Egypt, Italy, and other parts of the Mediterranean. Unlike traditional paintings in which paint is applied with a brush, the black monoliths are built in a way that parallels his sculptures. All but one of these paintings are composed of tesserae, small units of color that Whitten made by pouring pigment and acrylic into molds, usually recycled bottle caps and plastic packaging. Before adhering the pieces of the canvas, he sometimes cut, broke, and ground them. That is Jack Whitten. And the full circle to Leroy Jones, he described as a fellow aficionado of jazz. This painting is both fantasy and fantastical, a kind of futuristic homage to an important author, dramatist, music critic, civil rights activist, and leader of the Black arts movement in New York and New Jersey. Let me let you take that in for a moment in all of its multi-dimensional marble characteristics. And share with you what an art critic said about this piece. The experience of full circle is like looking at the Earth from a spaceship or through a telescope on the moon. The best part about it is that all the life of the universe is encapsulated on our planet, for there are no stars and no hint of any other life in a sky that is impenetrably black. It is a wonder that Whitten could manufacture so black a black as the space that surrounds this globe. The globe, however, is infinity. By creating intensity at the center with lots of color and small elements, Whitten draws the eye in ever deeper, and we eagerly search beyond what we see. Though this caption provided identifies the materials here as acrylic, it is a great jumble of collaged materials, not all of which are made of acrylic. There are lots of found materials as well, colorful heaps of life. In this, there is almost no contrast between black and white. The edge is between blank black and black that is filled with color, with idea, life, and above all, the representation of deep time. Here's an image of the history of the world in Baraka's color, all of his colors, the colors of thought, idea, travels, loves. This is also a mirror, it seems, for any viewer. You look at it less than you look into it. As you do, it's impossible not to want to find something, to see what you relate to pick out your place. In the other monoliths, there are boundaries to consider, and we are asked to deal with their significances for us. This one is different. The boundary is the ends of the earth, and we cannot but fall in. He did another monolith to Maya Angelou to honor that wonderful and inspiring African-American poet. And this is Jack Whitten at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis in 2015. He died at age 78 in 2018. And we celebrate his contributions to the blue marble and the black marble images of the black monolith. So with that as a context for our time, we're going to turn to principles-driven responsive philanthropy, building bridges across communities for peace, prosperity, and planet. And I'm going to turn it over to Mark to begin the session and welcome all of you to this important and inciting webinar. Mark, it's yours.
Thanks very much, Michael. Thanks, Charmaine, as well. And thank you for the great introduction. It's a powerful start and some really interesting words in those descriptions, Michael, that I think speak to Blue Marble evaluation and definitely speak to the work that GHR Foundation has done with our principles evaluation. I think the one that just struck me right now is you look at it less than you look into it. I think that's a great theme to kind of build on for what we're going to talk about today. So let me do the obligatory process here of sharing my screen and hope that everyone can see it. Let me get to presentation mode here, please. And pardon my, hopefully you all are seeing the screen and not my presentation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Well, again, thanks to Blue Marble Evaluation for allowing GHR to share more about our work through the BridgeBuilder Challenge. My name is Mark Guy. I'm a Senior Program Officer at GHR Foundation. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you on this webinar, regardless of where you are on our Blue Marble. Just a bit of background about GHR. GHR is a family foundation based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, here in the United States. And GHR exists to be of service to people and their limitless potential for good. For over 50 years, we have built partnerships to reimagine what's possible when pursuing change across our areas of impact, which include education, global development, and Alzheimer's prevention. And what we are excited to do today is to tell a bit of the story of our BridgeBuilder Challenge, which was a 3-year, $1 million annual open innovation challenge that we conducted with the help of OpenIDEO, which is an arm of IDEO, the design firm based in San Francisco in the United States. And walk you through some of the key aspects of BridgeBuilder, while we also highlight how the BridgeBuilder principles that we were able to develop along the way represent, I guess what you could call is a flavor of the Blue Marble principles, and talk about how some of the implications from the Blue Marble case study, we'll talk through some of those as well. Hopefully some of you have had a chance to read that case study, and if not, it's available online on the Blue Marble website. But before we start, and I'll be presenting with my colleague Nora from Inspire to Change, and maybe calling my other colleague Mary at GHR as well if needed. But what we want to do first is to ground this entire discussion in the idea and the ideal that we are all, I would assume we are all working towards, or at least all passionate about. And that's this notion of what evaluation really could and should be. And so what I want to start with is to share with you all an example that we did with one of our BridgeBuilder cohorts of really asking them their experience of what evaluation is. How have they experienced evaluation? And then also asking what in their minds it could be. So the idea from implementers and not from a donor of what evaluation could or should be. And so that's what you see on this slide is their finish to the sentence, evaluation is. And as you can see, they talk about how it's rigid, or it's log frames, or it's complex, it's done by others for us, it's expensive and time consuming, etc. And then we ask them to complete the sentence of what evaluation could or should be. And this is what they said, that it could be and should be useful and engaging, and should be long-term, that it should be about stories and a conversation in aspects around general or genuine learning that help to understand complex impacts. And I think this is important primarily because it really starts to show what the promise and the potential of working in a non-traditional way really is. And that's, in many ways, that's what BridgeBuilder represented to GHR when we began to envision it. But hopefully you'll start to see some of how this balance between what evaluation is, what it could or should be, is a thread that kind of runs through some of these principles and some of the larger work of BridgeBuilder as well. So the BridgeBuilder Challenge, to give you some background on that and its origins, really began in 2015. GHR and our board asked the staff to really repurpose about $1 million of funding a year for a few years. And we did that through 2015 and 2016. And as you may remember, that was a time of, at least in the US, it was the 2016 election where divisions were starting to cleave even wider. The migration crisis was on the headlines. There was climate action and climate issues all over the headlines as well. And typically GHR's areas, education, global development, Alzheimer's prevention, travel along these long arcs of change. And with repurposing this funding, GHR really wanted to explore an opportunity to respond to these more urgent and emergent needs, and to do so in a new way. Typically, we're only an invitation-only foundation. And so we thought about what could we do that might be innovative and different in terms of our grant making? And could we do an open call? How might we also allow the solutions to come to us rather than assume that we had the answers or knew specifically which one urgent and emergent issue we should focus on? Another piece that went into our thinking was also this idea that around that complex issues are interconnected and really cannot be separated from each other. Around this time also, Pope Francis, as it was noted earlier on the slide that Michael showed, was one of the few global moral voices that people would listen to. And he talked about how we should build bridges and not walls. And so we thought about how might that help us frame this? How might we create opportunities to connect issues and bring about radical ideas and radical change? And lastly, as we started to construct this, we wanted to make sure that we were incorporating our design build approach, which is really central to the way that GHR works. It's really central to how our founder, Gerald Rauenhorst, really approached his business, which is about embracing flexibility and challenging traditional ways of working. And we went into that trusting that the learning, the adapting, the growing would emerge through that design build process of collaboration, forging new partnerships. And even though we didn't know exactly what we were pointing to, and we couldn't quite put our finger on it with this idea of bridge building and building bridges, the overwhelming feeling in this notion was, here is something that ought to be tried. And so with the approval of our board back in 2016, we embarked upon a 3-year journey with OpenIDEO and launched 3 BridgeBuilder challenges from 2017 to 2019. That ended up building a community of over 30,000 change makers spread across 185 countries that really helped to source these ideas, bridging between peace, prosperity, and planet. And that's what you see on this slide in the green box. That was our challenge question that went out for both our 2017 and our 2018 challenge. And then in 2019, we pivoted slightly by focusing on a different nature of bridging. One focused on building bridges between people, and specifically people on the move and others in various communities in which they find themselves, which we called neighbors. But it also drew out this importance of human values, such as dignity and a future of promise, which we really felt were important to elevate in the call for ideas. And so with the resources that we had available, we were able to fund 3 cohorts of 5 top ideas from each challenge, and each idea in each challenge received a share of the $1 million. And I'm going to show you those on the next few slides, and really want to do this to help demonstrate how diverse these ideas were, both across geography and issue area. And so if you look at this, this is our top ideas from our 2017 challenge. ranging in location from Chicago, the south side of Chicago here in the United States, to the Democratic Republic of Congo, to Myanmar, focused on issues ranging from ethical gold mining at a small scale to tree planting drones. In 2018, we sourced and funded these 5 top ideas, again, across a wide variety of geographies, from South Sudan to Kenya to India to Boston, Massachusetts, dealing with indigenous land rights to peace building among youth to working around women-led community transformation related to domestic violence. And then even in 2019, even though the challenge itself was more focused on this notion of people on the move, still we're able to come up with a diversity of ways that solutions were being generated to build those bridges between people on the move and neighbors. And beginning in 2017, as we started to interact with that first cohort, and we saw just how diverse they were and how diverse their work was, and still not being sure exactly how we were going to define or bridge building or even exactly what it looked like, we still felt in that moment there was an opportunity to utilize BridgeBuilder to think about success differently, because we didn't want to just make these grants and then walk away. We still wanted to learn from them. And so we also saw this as a way that we could reconsider the role we should have as a funder in the evaluative process. Could we be more a listener and a connector of concepts rather than a definer of what success needs to be, needs to look like, or when it should come? And really the question that helped us center on that was, how might we better understand the how and not just the what? How might we try to evaluate extremely different projects operating in disparate parts of the world with very different cultures and contexts? We knew that trying to simply look at outputs from each project, whether it was in Kenya or the DRC or Boston, Massachusetts, would not create the kind of connection and learning between those projects and their work that we were really seeking with BridgeBuilder. And so this is where developmental evaluation, Nora and her team, and our journey with principles-focused evaluation really began, and kind of has changed our thinking ever since. And it's been so pivotal to how we've been able to understand BridgeBuilder in new and different ways along the past 3 years. It's been absolutely pivotal. Nora and her work has been absolutely pivotal for us. And as many of you know, principles-focused evaluation is all about using guiding principles, which are derived from experience, expertise, values, as well as research. And they examine whether the principles, first of all, are clear, meaningful, and actionable. And then if they are, whether they are actually being followed. And if those principles are being followed, whether they are leading to the desired results. And this was a very new journey for us as a donor. We'd never really gone into this process of principles evaluation. But as we learned more about it, principles-focused developmental evaluation, what we quickly realized was it was a perfect fit for bridge building, because bridge building is not necessarily quantifiable. It's not just about numbers, because there's something deeper that must be understood. Again, kind of going back to what Michael's words at the beginning around the art, you look at it less than you look into it. And so we started to figure out how might we then start to understand it. And we did not have the answers as a donor. And that's where we really looked to our cohorts to help us understand the how of their work, not just what they were producing, but how they were doing it. How were they interacting with their communities and their partnerships at that community level? And we asked our first cohort of bridge builders in 2017 really to help us illuminate that and that process. And we went through a brainstorming exercise of really kind of bringing out what are the core concepts of how they do their work. And it was a bit of a brainstorming and then a heat mapping exercise, as you see here in the image. And it brought out amazing similarities that we couldn't have found on our own. And it started with these 9 core concepts that you see here: trust building, meeting people where they are, elevating the community assets and building strong local partnerships, et cetera. And from those core concepts, we were able to draft our first set of BridgeBuilder principles with Nora and her team's help. And then those principles went through similar exercises of iteration and improvement from both the 2017 cohort as well as our 2018 and 2019 cohorts, which really helped us to evolve the principles to where they are today, which is what you see on this slide. And I realized I just made a huge jump from where we were in 2017 to where we ended up in 2020. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But the other thing that we were able to do with these principles when we got to 2020 was to integrate them and weave them together with our GHR values, which are on the left-hand side here, which were rolled out at that same time. So the GHR values are lead with love, reimagine what's possible, partner boldly, and navigate and adapt. And what we found when we looked at them side by side was they really started to animate each other. And they helped us understand more about what those words actually meant in the world and actually meant in terms of how we do our work and how our partners do their work. Now that leap that I just made, we're not going to talk much more about kind of that journey from 2017 to 2020. But I will mention that GHR and Inspire to Change will soon be publishing some additional pieces, which number one, analyze how the principles manifested themselves in the work of our partners, as well as a case study that does provide a bit more of an overview of the evolution process of the principles from 2017 to 2020. And so we can make sure to share that with Michael and Charmaine and the network, as well as kind of publish it on our website. So happy to make that available once those are ready. But before we go on and talk a little bit more about some of the similarities between the Blue Marble principles and the BridgeBuilder principles, I think it is important to note that GHR did not enter our BridgeBuilder challenge or this process of developing our principles with the Blue Marble principles in mind. That connection was made for us by Nora in her link to Michael and Charmaine and the work that they were doing in Blue Marble. And Nora kind of said, there's something here, there's similarity, and it's really interesting to start a dialogue about that. And I think what's important is that it shows that the framework that Blue Marble evaluation provides is big enough. There's room enough to roam that allows for innovation and customization. And as I noted earlier, we believe the BridgeBuilder principles in many ways, in that kind of space to roam, that room to roam, represent a real world flavor of what the Blue Marble principles look like in action. And so what we want to talk about just for a few minutes here as we come towards the end of the presentation is talk about a few areas from the case study where there was particularly strong alignment between the BridgeBuilder principles and the Blue Marble principles. And I'll start with the cross silos principle from Blue Marble that talks about engaging across sectors and issues for system change. And that relates almost directly and with a huge, solid, bold line to our build and our bridge principles, because that is at the very heart of what BridgeBuilder is about. Bridging between peace, prosperity, and planet, and then this added notion that grew out of our 2019 challenge to do it in a way that protects human dignity. But the other thing here too is that it's also about, this process is also about strengthening, not just building bridges. There are some bridges that exist, they just aren't strong enough yet. And that for us too was a realization that it doesn't always have to be something new that has to be created. Sometimes it's just a fortification or a retrofit of a bridge. And it's not always looking about a new situation or new solution, but how do you just strengthen the bridges that are there? The second one that really is particularly strong in terms of a link is the Blue Marble principle of global, which again talks about integrating complex interconnections across levels, with our BridgeBuilder principles of meet and root. And where the link there is that the complex issues our BridgeBuilder partners are addressing are far reaching. Sometimes they're global, sometimes they're coming at it from a global view, sometimes they're national or more local. Again, these issues around migration, climate change, conflict, etc. But regardless of that, for any solution to work, it has to fit with those who are meant to partake in it. And so clearing a pathway for interconnections to travel across levels really begins with the notion of meet and root, these two BridgeBuilder principles. Meet people where they are, not just geographically, but socially, culturally, and otherwise. And then root the solutions deeply in the context, cultures, knowledge, wisdom, etc. of partner communities. And then the last connection that I'll talk about is between these two blue marble principles of transboundary and yin yang with our two bridge builder principles of challenge and promote. So transboundary, talking about acting at a global scale, and then yin yang about harmonizing conceptual opposites, and how that relates to the notion of challenging power structures from our bridge builder work, and then promoting pathways that move our world in a more equitable and just direction, both locally and globally. And perhaps the relationships between these two blue marble and bridge builder principles is best encapsulated in what our bridge builders talked about and what they wrestle with almost on a daily basis around systems change. And we had a conversation with them about this last year, and it really kind of centered around whether to engage in revolution or evolution of the system. And again, how to harmonize these opposites, these conceptual opposites, and act knowing that, and I think the key there is not only how to harmonize them, but also act knowing that where they are, where our bridge builders are now, both in terms of place and in time, is bound up in so much more than what you can see in front of you and around you. Again, kind of some of the words that you said, Michael, at the beginning around some of that art is encapsulated there as well. And our bridge builder partners noted how both are necessary, revolution and evolution, but striking the balance between the two is what's difficult. And how do you at least begin to change the underlying conditions of a system, while knowing that the full systems change you may not be able to see? And so I want to highlight some of the quotes that we had from that conversation with our bridge builder to give you a sense of kind of where that wrestling, that process is for them almost on a daily basis. Some of our bridge builders said, incremental change is not enough anymore. The system only listens to the powerful. And so how do you cause obstruction to an extent that people will listen? At the same time, others said, can you wait for a revolution, for enough energy to be built up to overthrow the system? Others said, how do you reconcile a system with the attitudes and behaviors of those who live in the system? While still other bridge builders said, how do you ensure the system actually upholds the worthy parts of what is in place? That not everything is wrong with every system. There are actually some things that are good that just need to be made sure that those are actually happening. And lastly, one of our bridge builders said, really, where they see the balance here is empowering and elevating those that have a vision to bring about change and helping them lead and participate in this system. This was from a bridge builder partner that works with youth and sees them as a way to transform the system over time. And we discussed this notion of how to build that balance to do both. We didn't come up with any answers, but again, I think it's just a great illustration of how this happens on an everyday basis in that real world situation. How can we be part of the evolution and the revolution? How can we work for incremental and radical change while living in this system and staying true to ourselves when what ourselves may be saying is that we have to go against everything that is in the system? Another colleague kind of encapsulated it really well in saying, how do you disentangle things without them coming crashing down over everyone's heads? So again, in many ways, the relationship and the balance between these particular principles represent much of the essence of what bridge building is all about. That is, building or strengthening bridges and connections between what is and what could or should be. As our partners demonstrated in that evaluation exercise I noted at the beginning, and how they continue to find that and strike that balance in that journey on a daily basis. So I'm gonna pause here and turn it over to Nora to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges of implementing the Blue Marble principles in the real world, as demonstrated by GHR's Bridge Builder principles. Nora?
Great, thanks, Mark. That was so fun to hear, right? We're always in the details of it, that to step back and hear you talk about it was, my favorite word, inspiring. So for Blue Marble principles that I thought were particularly challenging, one is this, the cluster of transformation principles. For those of you who don't know me, and I see a lot of familiar faces on the call, I have a master's degree in research methods and I have a PhD in evaluation. And like Michael says, evaluation grew up in the projects. And so that's what I learned. I learned how to evaluate projects and programs. When I completed my PhD in 2014, people were just starting to think about systems change and evaluation. There were like 10 published chapters or articles about it. You know, we've come so far since then, but I don't think we've gotten to the point of understanding transformation. I think that's the next edge. In all my training, the only class I took that really helped me think about transformation was at the University of Minnesota Center for Spirituality and Healing. And I took a class on whole systems healing, right? How do you stop cutting down a rainforest when that's the only economy for people that live there, right? That we are living beings engaged with a system, and we can't do system transformation without looking at it in a holistic blue marble way. But I've never gotten that training as an evaluator. It can be found, but it's not standard. So I think that we can, and Blue Marble is doing a wonderful job of bringing us together around this idea so that we can be better at helping our clients have a theory of transformation, because our partners, they're not usually any further ahead than we are. So how do we help each other, and how do we help our partners through this idea of what transformation is, what it looks like, so that you can have fidelity to it, right? You can't even get to fidelity unless you have your theory. So I'd love to see the evaluation field and the philanthropy field like really take this on, I don't know, with vigor and passion. For skin in the game, it is just really hard in development work to have skin in the game. Like, we are almost always sitting in an office in Minnesota or wherever we are while the work is happening on the ground. And while this is very important to me, it's not my life. This is literally a matter of life and death for grantees that we talk to, right? Like, they're working in regions where there's civil unrest, and all of a sudden, you know, you might not hear from them, or they need to not be seen by the government in certain ways. So they will always have more skin in the game in the way philanthropy is done right now. There was no way to disrupt that sufficiently, I think, in the time frame and the budget that we had for this project. Bricolage methods. So how do you incorporate principles to match methods to the evaluation situation? You know, we had a conversation where we said, what if we gave the grantees money and said, evaluate in the way that's culturally appropriate, or tell us your story of the work in a way that's culturally appropriate, and tell us what the impact was, instead of us going to them and doing it to them. And while we tried not to do things to people in this work, still, the power was in our hands. So I also think that what we can do as an evaluation field is get away from the idea that we have to see it in order for it to be credible and reliable and objective, and think about the ways that we can actually integrate how other cultures communicate and tell stories and understand their experience. For the world savvy principle, the GHR team is amazing. Mark and Mary and Chris is on the call, and I'm not sure if Carrie's on the call, but the number of hours that we spent in meetings, learning, adapting, navigating, revising, like it was an unbelievable commitment. And yet with work this deep, and as Mark said, this interrelated and this complex, we could have spent more time. And it's just not business as usual to spend as much time learning and reflecting as adapting. And so as like doing. So we need to really put time and budgets for learning and adaptation and reflection, and not squeeze it in. Yeah, so I think those are some places that we had room for improvement in this project, because I think it largely reflects on the way that philanthropists and evaluators and grantees interact in what is considered business as usual. throw it back to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. And so as you can see it from the case study, if you've had a chance, we also talk a little bit about some implications for evaluation. And so I'll just touch on two of those here, and Nora, feel free to add into on that. But I think one of the implications that has really resonated with GHR from all of this is the one around we need to remember our past. This need to recognize the role that philanthropy, development, and evaluation has played and continues to play in kind of creating and maintaining oppressive systems. And what principles evolution, our evolution of our principles, as I noted before, eventually flow together in a confluence with our GHR values. And in many ways that was serendipitous, but at the same time, it allowed for this further strengthening for us of a definition of how we should aspire to be in our work and how we do that work, at the foundation, but then also how our partners should do that work as well, because it's our partners that are also doing the development work. And so how can we live out those principles and encourage our partners to live out those principles in ways that remember things differently? And the other piece too is that we continue to kind of examine how the BridgeBuilder principles might help us do this work of remembering and approach grant making across all of our programs in a more equitable way. So it's, again, not just kind of only through the BridgeBuilder challenge, but now applying these principles more broadly across our organization. How might that help us to do things differently? And the other one I'll touch on here is this issue around needing more time. Again, I think in this around balance of urgent and emergent and evolution, revolution, there's some urgent global work that does have to be solved right now. But there's other urgent global work that may need to unfold at the pace of years, decades, centuries. It's going to take generations to fully change. And the threads of complex work each unfold in their own way and at their own pace. And so we should therefore kind of respond accordingly, allowing those different timelines in our work, not necessarily define what that change should look like or when it should occur by. So likewise, the BridgeBuilder and the principles evaluation really continue to challenge GHR and its thinking around measurement, evaluation, and impact, and what is and what should be, again, what is and what should be most important to track, and how might we more effectively and equitably define that success, both in terms of impact and outcomes, but also as we think about timelines as well. So with that, I think that's kind of where we'll pause for now and just say thanks to everyone for your time and the opportunity to share this. But I think Charmaine also got some time for Q&A as well. So happy to answer any questions about our journey in all of this too.
Thank you so much, Mark and Nora, for all your work. Glenn is going to facilitate the Q&A, so I will hand it over to him.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And thank you, Mark and Nora. What a wonderful presentation. We do have a question and actually a couple of questions. So first is from Sarah Parkinson. Thank you for the fascinating presentation. Question from Mark. You mentioned that people in the workshop had brainstormed what evaluation is, mainly negative, limiting, and what it could be, positive, supporting, useful. Can you speak to this in terms of your experience to date with Blue Marble evaluation? Which of these descriptors seem to fit? In what most tangible ways has it been useful so far?
I would say we continue to be on the journey of, again, kind of traveling along that bridge of what it is to what it should or could be in our own journey with evaluation, and that is at least for us has been an ongoing conversation for a while now of how can we think about how we learn as a foundation differently, and I think part of that stems from the fact that we like to build our partnerships in that way of really kind of approaching our grant making as a partnership and less so as a grantor-grantee relationship. We do our best when the opportunity is available outside of COVID times to spend time with our partners face to face and to hear and to see the work firsthand. And it's in that process that we really start to understand so much more than the numbers that they might report on an interim report or a final report to us for the grant making process, that what. We actually see more of the how. And it's in that process where we're trying to understand what's the balance of understanding the importance of the outputs, how many children are affected, how many vaccine or how many trials have gone on for Alzheimer's prevention research, et cetera, with the how and how do we strike that balance. So our journey is in that process of what's important to collect, in writing, and what's important for us to kind of collect in relationship, and how to document those two sets of things in the best way possible that, again, tells the full story. Because again, both pieces are important. Quantifiable and qualifiable are both important. But how do we do so in a way that does tell the whole story? And on the qualifying, qualitative aspects, that's really where we're trying to put in the most work of how do we do that in different ways. Some of that came through this BridgeBuilder challenge process and working with Nora and her team, where they analyzed a lot of the conversations that we had and then used Max QDA to actually categorize and elevate what were the concepts and the themes that came out. But also, it's also a fact of how do we build more of that just into the way that we do our work. So I realize it's probably not the best answer to your question, Sarah, but hopefully a little bit more enlightening.
Well, this actually builds off that question, and it's really looking at the degree of internal support for Blue Marbles. So this is from Anna Martin. I'd love to hear Mark talk about any resistance there was within GHR around working this way, spending so much time reflecting, relinquishing power, leaning into uncertainty. What did it look like within their organization to teach within and get people on board?
I'll pause first and say, Nora, did you want to add something too that might also contribute to this process, or you want to wait, Nora, to chime in? I saw your hand go up on the last question, Nora. You're on mute.
What I wanted to say on the last one is how appreciative grantees were about the space that Mark and Mary created for them to learn and reflect. So we would have calls with cohort members, but they'd bring their whole team. And we would ask a pair of questions or a set of questions like, how important is this principle to you? How deeply have you integrated it to your work? And what is different when it's going well? And it let them sit and not have to report numbers or put on a show. They knew there was no right or wrong answer. And they said, they came up with things like, wow, I realized that we do this well in pockets and we could do better at bringing this principle across our whole system of work. Or we realize that when we do it well, we feel in alignment with our values. And when we're not doing it well, we feel like a fraud, internally. And so there, some of the feedback we got is that people felt really liberated to have the time and the space to think about learning and evaluation this way.
The other thing I'll add, Anna, to your question is it is different, and it's expensive in time and resource and ability even sometimes to do this. And I think that for us also is a continual process of educating our board and our leadership of how we tell the whole story of our impact. And so we try to use where we have the ability to be out in the field with our partners. We're blessed with a foundation and leadership that believes in that as well, to maximize that chance. So when we're in the field, it's long days and it's deep conversations, whether you're at a site or whether you're traveling to a site, trying to mine as much as you can. But then the other piece is that it's ensuring that those stories then come up in those leadership and board discussions. And so it's also an ongoing effort within our staff of how do we best tell the stories of this work, and coming back to that, what evaluation could or should be, not just the numbers, but what are the stories behind there. A lot of the times we use in our staff and kind of as we prep for board meetings, not just engaging the head, but engaging the heart as well. And so whether that's bringing guests that are partners to those meetings and have them share some of their work and their journey firsthand with our board, whether that's in person or virtual as we've been over the past year or so, or staff bringing that in what we communicate to our team as well. It's trying to do both of those things, head and heart, so that we're telling that the full story.
And there's two more questions, one from Gurpreet Singh from Skoll and one from Nikki Bauman. So I'll read the first one first. This is a question very similar to Anna's. At the Skoll Foundation, this is from Gurpreet, we're currently redesigning our MENL frameworks and processes to reflect our revised strategy and values. And there seems to be a disconnect between my team, which is attempting to reframe impact, in quotes, and assert the need to embrace many of the core concepts in equitable evaluation and blue marble evaluation. And our leadership and board, which is still focused on, quote, so how will we know we're making impact, unquote. Could you speak to GHR's experience in describing rolling up impact in a way that can be understood by those not completely on board with this different way of doing evaluation?
Yeah, and that's a huge challenge. I think both within BridgeBuilder, but in some of our other work as well, where we believe we're engaged in systems change and knowing that we're not going to see probably maybe in our lifetimes an entire system changed, but how can we focus on the underlying conditions of the systems and seeing where those things change that serve as an indicator to that travel towards impact. And in one of our initiatives, we talk about this notion of tipping points and how do we work to work with our partners and in terms of strengthening a system to reach the tipping point, knowing that we may not ever see the actual end line, but can we get things to a tipping point where from that point forward, momentum will carry forward in a self-sustaining, hopefully in a self-sustaining manner, and be able to withstand external shocks that no doubt will continue to come at those systems, but that there is that piece of momentum and drive and energy and cohesiveness to drive that system forward. And we're starting to actually do some work around that. How would we define a tipping point? Because that isn't necessarily a quantifiable indicator as well. In some of our partnerships discussions in some of our countries in which we work, we talk about what a tipping point is and how would our partners define it. One of our partners said it's when we start to do things differently. It's that notion of behavior change where we've moved into a new way of doing. And again, you can't exactly spot that in one time, but what are some of the things that lead up to that? And so I think for us, it's a journey of saying that impact is kind of understanding a path of travel along points of key motion or momentum building that lead towards or point towards this notion of a tipping point. And we still are trying to put together the pieces of what that looks like and how to tell that story, because exactly as you say, Gurpreet, it's difficult to talk about systems change with leadership or board that aren't in the work every day. And so that's the other piece here is not only how do you define all this, but then how do you put it in terms that make sense to people that aren't in the work every day? How can you basically tell the story in a layman's terms ways that's still powerful enough to get that message across?
Wonderful. This is a message from Nikki Bauman, and I just want to acknowledge Nikki's wonderful blessing that she gave us at the opening of this session. Flying Eagle Woman, thank you. So she says, what theories were used in this work? Are there artistic and nonverbal representations, change builder theories of change, with teaching stories embedded? Was critical cartography used to tell the stories of the non-humans in the ecologies of practice, aka otherwise known as decolonizing work products and data visualization?
Nora, I'll maybe turn it over to you on that one. Maybe you're a better place to answer that. Nora, you're on mute.
Hey, Nikki, it was good to see your face briefly. I don't know how you write a question while you're driving that's more eloquent than one I can write while sitting at my computer. So
I wasn't driving when I wrote it.
okay. I was like, that's impressive. What we did, Nikki, instead of starting with the theories, it was 2017, we did a principles focused developmental evaluation. And I'd say at the time, but Michael, I don't know how many exemplars were out there of principles focused developmental evaluations. I don't think there were many, and Mark and Mary really took a leap of faith. So that was pretty amazing. We went the theory that, and I use with a little t, the theory that we needed to hear from the grantees what was important to them. And so everything we did was grounded theory, grounded in their responses and their descriptions. And what I want to say, you asked, did we use visual, verbal, artistic and verbal representations of change builder theories? Some of that was done in the selection process. So as part of the challenge, and Mary, maybe you could, or Mark, you could talk to that. But there was some of that work in the beginning of the challenge. But if we go to Alania's point of what if you didn't have the constraint of time or resource, we did have a very real constraint of time and resource. Like $1 million sounds like a lot, but spread over 15 people doing work at a massive scale is actually not a lot at all. And so one, were we asking grantees to facilitate theory of change conversations with people on the ground? And the answer is no. And we talked about that a lot. It's like, how would we train grantees to do that in a way where we're not they're sophisticated enough not to impose a way of thinking, to do it in all the different languages. I mean, I'm not sure. Most of the 15 grantees were working with dozens of languages, right? So we had all of these ways to think about if we wanted to actually do it equitably and in a not colonized way. I think we didn't actually know quite where to start with all that diversity. And I think it needs to be, like, so thoughtful that what you do in Myanmar and in Kenya and in Boston needs to look different linguistically in all these different ways. And I guess that's what I wanted to say with the bricolage method. I'm not sure how you do this, but we need to figure it out. We need to figure out how you can honestly engage with that principle of meet people where they are. How do you meet people where they are with evaluation to get them to articulate theory of change or whatever words they would use to describe what's important about the work? So I think that's a limitation of this project. I think it's a limitation of development work and of evaluation and philanthropy. So if I had all the time and resource in the world, I would figure out how we would do that, right? I would figure out how we can evaluate or learn in a way that does not interject Western ideas, that does not ask people to speak in English, and does not ask people to speak in a linear sort of, logical way of communicating. So I don't know if that answers your question, Nikki and Alania, but this is, you can tell I'm getting worked up. This is something I really care about. And that we never have enough resource to do it well.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit more color too. I mean, as Nora was saying, we tried, as part of why we went with OpenIDEO in terms of their platform was because they allowed for us to truly allow the ideas to come to us in a way that made the most sense to the submitters. And granted, it was still in kind of a Western-centric English language primarily way at the start. What we did was you tried to take steps with each subsequent challenge to reduce those barriers a little bit more. We tried to push ourselves a little bit more every time, whether that was translating our challenge materials, or whether in the third challenge was actually having people on the move as interpreters of the ideas that were coming in to tell us about, from your real world experience, does this seem feasible? Have you seen things like this, really involving them in the actual kind of evaluation of the proposals process? but it was also a platform that allowed for submitters to put pictures up, to put videos up of telling the story of their work, etc., instead of just having everything be on a Microsoft Word form or document. And then also the platform itself allowed for others to comment on the ideas and spark an interaction within that community of change makers, where they could look at each other's ideas on the platform and say, wow, what you're doing in Cameroon is really similar to what we're doing in India. Can we connect sometime and talk more about it and find those connections? So it was both a matter, I think an advantage there was both allowing us to see how those connections and synergies were built, but then also allowing that to happen then offline and to take those conversations elsewhere as well.
Wonderful conversations. And one final question, getting back, I guess, into the head side and maybe the sort of the economics of it. Mark, have you ever had to make the business case for Blue Marble, the sort of return on investment kind of rationale for why to implement? And if so, how has that gone?
Technically, no. And again, we continue to have the conversation internally, really kind of focused on the BridgeBuilder principles, because that language is familiar to our leadership and board. Those of us that are involved in the work, knowing that it falls within this larger space of Blue Marble principles. But I think we're coming to that conversation eventually, because again, as we look at what we're doing as a foundation and some of the areas, not only where we currently work, but some of the work we're starting to dive into in some of our other kind of either restructured initiatives or some new work we may be taking on. This notion around Blue Marble and principles-based evaluation is going to be critical to really understanding the impact of what we're doing. I mean, just like we've talked about in these other questions, really trying to put a finger on what does impact and what does this work mean to us and what does it mean to the communities in which we're working. And so we're going to get there. And I think, again, that's where it's on, the onus is on us as a staff to continue to tell these stories, to give these examples of what this starts to look like through things like BridgeBuilder that we already have done. But then also, as we've kind of linked it to our values, to say, this is what living this value as a foundation, leading with love, or navigating and adapting, this is what it actually looks like. And so if we really truly believe that these are our values and this is how we should be doing the work, this is therefore what it means in terms of how we try to do the evaluation for us as a foundation.
Yeah, fantastic. Michael, over to you.
Let me comment on the theories of change question. Nikki had to take off, but I'll follow up with her. Principles are a substitute and an alternative to theories of change. Theories of change assume control. They're command and control thinking. They are based mainly on linear causality. You've predetermined outcomes and you have causal paths for getting there. Principles are directed at complex dynamic systems where you're first being sure, based on values, that you're doing the right things. And then your complexity tells us we're not in control. We're learning through engagement as things unfold, with co-creation, with the respect that goes on. And so complexity theory is a theory of engagement in complex dynamic systems. It requires principles to anchor that. The theories of change piece is for the old project mentality that Nora talked about. It's not helpful when you're dealing with highly mutual engagement in complex dynamic systems. And it's not that theories of change are bad if you're doing project work, but if you're not doing project work, it actually simplifies what amounts to a complexity, which is what principles are aimed at dealing with. Charmaine, I think you're on.
Thanks, everyone. So traditionally, our webinars end at about the hour mark, but we have gotten some feedback that people would like a chance to have more conversations. And so we're going to offer some small groups now. We decided to just assign you randomly so that you'll interact with people from across different sectors. And so I'm going to go ahead and open rooms for you. And we're inviting you to I'll put the prompts in the chat. Introduce yourselves to one another. You know, this is a network, so we want you to have a chance to get to know one another. And then talk about how you've been using Blue Marble evaluation in your work, and any challenges that you've encountered, things that would help you to do more of this, support that we could offer. And we'll have about 20 minutes in the small groups, 15, 20 minutes. I'll give you a warning when we're going to close, and then just come back and close it out. So I know small groups aren't for everyone. You're welcome to stay if you choose to leave. I see some folks dropping off. That's totally understandable as well. But we do want to give you a chance to go a little bit deeper into some of these ideas. So I'm going to, now that we've had a few people shuffle around, I'm just going to move a few people into different groups, and then I will open the room. So bear with me here for a moment. And I don't know, now we only have about 12 of us, so I'm not even sure if it's worth it. You know, you get feedback and then you, so I don't know, what do you all think? Should we just continue to talk, or do you want me?
We've maybe self-selected into our own small group now.
Yeah, we basically have. You know, small groups, and then people are like, gotta go. So I could just do 2 rooms. Maybe I'll do that, and then we'll see how it goes. Does that sound good to everybody? All right, go forth, enjoy. I'll be here in case there's any questions or issues. Do y'all see the invite to join a group? I think Shirley, Silva, Thomas, Mauricio, you all should have invites. If you don't see them, let me know.
Hi, Charmaine. I don't.
Hi. You don't see one? All right, let me try again here.
Not yet.
No, I don't either.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, are you seeing an invitation? Oh, there you go. Zoom. I hope that was useful. Is there anyone from either of the groups who wants to share a main point or a takeaway? We close.
I would love to reiterate my point, which is that all of you who stayed until the bitter end here are change makers. That the spaces where this is embraced wholeheartedly are far and few between. So if you're going to do this work, know that you're a disruptor, and make sure you have your people, because it can get lonely and exhausting. But I'm glad you found your people here, at least for a little while.
This is Todd speaking. Oh, there's my video. Well, we'll see how it goes. I'd like to share a reflection from our small group. So toward the end there, we started talking about how, how do you translate things like the Blue Marble principles to folks that aren't living and breathing evaluation and thinking about this kind of stuff all the time. and they may be coming at things from a more traditional orientation. And one thing I thought, which I didn't have time to share, but I'll just share it now, is there's a great book by Al Atmansky, and it's about how to scale up social innovations. And he talks about 6 principles, or I guess ideas, that he came across in his research. And one of them that he talked about was, actually, no, sorry, not in the 6 principles, but he talks about 3 kinds of social innovators. The first kind is like a disruptor social innovator, someone who's just willing to throw a monkey wrench into everything. The second type of social innovator is, I guess, the cross-cultural translator, like the person that can connect different groups together and support them to understand one another. And then the third type of social innovator he talks about is the bureaucrat, like the person on the inside who can navigate the system. And it just kind of struck me as an interesting way to think about, like, if you are really passionate about Blue Marble evaluation or principles focused evaluation or developmental evaluation, that to think about what kind of an innovator, social innovator you are, and maybe if you need another type of social innovator, or to even think that way as a way of sharing ideas or tackling the challenge that you face. I've always found that an interesting way to frame the idea of how to scale up a social innovation or communicate with others so that they can move to that next level of understanding.
Thank you. Michael, it looks like you're ready to close us out here.
I just thought I'd take us back to the beginning and thank everybody for being a part of it. Do you have an upcoming event you want to mention, Charmaine?
We will have, I think, one more webinar at the very end of February, but we're still working on dates. So we're kind of look to the end of the month for several webinars coming up end of February, end of March, but I can't share dates quite yet. So hopefully you're on our newsletter. And if not, go to bluemarbleeval.org and register, join the network, and let us know if there are other ideas you have for ways you would like support or to connect with one another. We're always learning and evolving, and glad to have you all on board. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.